Get ready, everyone, for a deep dive into a conversation that challenges what we know with Raquel, Black queer author, and redefining what inclusion really means. So, thanks so much for being here. Let's begin. Can you tell me how to pronounce your name?
Raquel.
Raquel. Okay, I
Mhm.
didn't want to pronounce your name wrong. So, Raquel. And Raquel, if you would introduce yourself and what you do.
So my name is Raquel Raylene. I'm an author. I write mostly queer book, Black main characters, in a plethora of genres. I don't like to stick to just one.
I'm the same way. Where did the idea of Balance of the Fates come about?
So it's funny because the Balance of the Fates that I ended up with, the published version, is so completely different than the one I started with.
For
It's
sure.
literally a completely different book. Because it started out with an idea I had when I was like driving one day. At this time, I was working at a paint store and I was driving from work, I believe. And all of a sudden, this idea came to me of like a book with like a school, like a university full of princesses. But all of these princesses were like based on different states. So, like, Washington princess and like a Texas princess, like all these different like states of princesses. And it was going to be a, queer romance between these, two of the higher princesses or whatever. So I was just so obsessed with the idea. So while I was at work, like I would be writing down ideas for this book, just like get any like spare scrap of paper that I could get. But then as I got into the editing process, obviously it ended up changing so much because originally that was going to be it wasn't going to be fantasy, but I love fantasy so much that I can't help but put fantasy into like all of my works. So I ended up being like, well, let's add a little bit of fantasy. And then it slowly snowballed into what we have now, which is a completely different book.
I would say from square one, that is definitely different. And then to the writing side of things. So, what is your writing process?
So it's kind of simple. Well, at least I guess to me, everyone's processes are different. But I am constantly like my brain is always in creative mode. So like I'll get like random like ideas for things. Sometimes I'll get like a fully fledged idea. Sometimes it'll be just like little pieces of ideas, and I'll kind of like I have my notes app on my phone that's literally just writing ideas. So whenever a writing idea comes to me, I'll just like add it in there. And once I get enough ideas to kind of like stitch together like a whole like plot for a story, I'll be like, okay, it's time to write that. Or sometimes the idea will just be so like, you need to write this right now that I just like immediately have to dive in. Like with Balance of Fates, that was one of the ones that I immediately like, there was no waiting for more ideas. I immediately just had to dive into that idea because it was just so heavy on my brain. So kind of stitched the ideas that I have together, and then I'll make a sheet, like I'll get a sheet of paper and I'll like divide it into like, okay, so what are the characters? What are the settings? What are the plot? So any information that's already in my brain about this idea, I'll just fill in each of those squares with like my base ideas. And then I'll take each of those, I'll make like a basic like outline that's usually maybe a couple paragraphs. And then from there, I'll take those paragraphs and then write an entire like, okay, act one, act two, act three. And then I'll go into doing the first draft. And then after I read the first draft, which is usually not super long or like super detailed, I'll be like, okay, new ideas will start coming together with like these characters stuff. And then it'll just be another draft and another draft, another draft until I have a full book.
That's actually really cool. But you and I both share the same thing in doing at least the notes on your phone. I do that too, except for when I'm driving, I make sure to park if it comes. But yeah,
Yeah,
we have
yeah.
that in common. I just can't
I
do the whole outline. I don't have the attention span for that.
Well, I didn't used to. I used to be a pantser like 100%. But especially because I mostly a lot of my stories like have fantasy elements, it's so much harder to keep the story straight because before I published Balance of Fates, I had been writing for like 10 years. Like from when I decided, okay, I want to be a writer, it had been 10 years before I actually published Balance of Fates. And my problem was always that I would have an idea, I would love it, I would do the first draft, and then I would find like plot holes or whatever, and then I'll end up, okay, I have to tear it all down and do it all over again. And it was just so much work, and I never could get a finished product from that. So I was like, okay, okay, I need an outline or else I'm never going to be able to finish a book. Now I love my outlines. I couldn't do it without them.
But you also write, like, I personally have it. I've done children's books, poetry book. Right now I'm working on my memoir slash the second one to my children's book on pronouns, but I also haven't written like fantasy or anything like that. So I might have to do that for mine that I am writing right now. That is kind of fantasy, kind of creepy. I don't know. Death is involved in my story, but it's a queer, all queer. But so you're actually helping me write too. You pretty much answered that one, but how did you get started on Kickstarter?
So Kickstarter, I kind of fell into like a lot of things that I've done in like my writing career, just kind of like fell into it. I guess I think I saw someone's video on TikTok, like talking, like an author who was talking about TikTok. Because like I kind of knew about Kickstarter as writing because Brandon Sanderson, I know I had heard way back when like that he was like one of the biggest Kickstarter like things ever. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like I didn't really know much about Kickstarter. And then later on TikTok, I saw another author who's, a much smaller author. And I was like, oh, they were able to do that and they were able to do it so well. I can't think of her name now. Yeah, I'm really horrible with names if you don't know.
Okay.
But, she's amazing on TikTok and her Kickstarter did so well. And I was like, maybe this would be an idea because again, I am an indie author and indie authors have to go out of pocket for things like editing and covers and stuff. And so I was like, maybe this could be very helpful to me. So I decided to do a bunch of research on YouTube. I went on YouTube, I looked up how to run a Kickstarter, like all of that stuff. The biggest issue with that was the math stuff because I'm not good at math. Like figuring out like the, goals and the money and stuff. That was difficult. But yeah, so I just started researching it and I was like, you know what, let me just give this a try. And it ended up working out.
Well, yeah, yeah, at least of what I've seen of well, I've only seen one so far, but I am on for the other ones that you have set up too. At least I'm on the list of favorite for whenever it becomes live. But yes, it's very smooth of what I've seen, and I will possibly be copying a little bit on that. I suck at math also, so you're not alone. I'm learning. I'm trying to learn too. It's hard, especially when it comes to editing and figuring out all the factors. You're artist, like we talked about earlier, art and commissioning artists and figuring out that because each artist is different and how they choose to get paid and how they want to do contract. Yeah. And now back to Balance of the Fates. How did you come up with the separation of witches, werewolves, and vampires?
So for that, it was a mixture of the original idea where I was gonna have like those different kingdoms, the different princesses. But also just because I grew up, I loved reading magical books, werewolf books, vampire books. And in a lot of those, it's usually like, oh, like vampires and werewolves are like, mortal enemies and stuff like that. So that influence of like the books that I grew up reading, I was like, hey, that would be great. So that's kind of how I decided to do that.
Well, I like that it also has your own flair to it. Like, I really love each character's name, and I am bad with memorizing characters' names, just so you know, but I really can actually look at her name in the front. Which I might pronounce their names wrong, and if I do, please tell me, because I don't want to butcher names. Lucia and Adelaide. Yeah. I really like how you have these names, because they're really, really good names. And yeah, and I like the fact that it's not a whitewashed book. I just want to bring that up in there, because we have way too many whitewashed books.
Yeah.
Way too many. We need more authors like you and Kaylin Byron. I love her so much. We need more authors like both of you. You
Yeah,
right now are part of my mix of reading.
well, that was actually part of my journey, like as an author. Because, like I said, it took me 10 years before I wrote The Balance of Fates. Because when I started college, that's when I decided to pursue, my writing, and I went to school for creative writing. And when I first started writing, a lot of like my earlier work that are just hidden away in my computer somewhere had like white main characters. Because growing up, like a majority of the characters that I read and I saw, like watched on TV and movies were white characters. And so when I first started writing these books, the characters were white. And it wasn't until I went to college and I started, taking these different classes. I had this amazing screenwriting class or screenplay class with this amazing Black teacher. Her name is Mildred, and she does a lot of stuff in the theater and stuff. And she was amazing. She was actually my first Black teacher that I've ever had. And so her and talking with her and that, as well as I took different classes. I had like I don't remember the name of the class, but it was like a translation class. So we read a lot of works from like across the world, like, Africa and Asia and stuff that were like translated into English. And so these amazing works from these, authors of color that I was like, oh my gosh. And that's when my writing really started to improve. And, I really started to write characters that were my identity. And that's when I feel like I felt more confident to publish because I was finally writing books that were more real to me.
Yes, of course. And just to reiterate, the whitewash that we have, in which I've heard some other voices talk about that too, which I completely agree with, that we need less of the whitewash and more just voices that you've never heard from before, because then you get introduced to not as boring as white is. I don't know how to say that without offending people, so if you're offended, I'm not really sorry because I stand strong on that, but it's just nice. Like, I personally don't write, like, I write disabled characters because I'm disabled. I write queer because I'm queer, but I don't touch anywhere else because I don't personally feel it's my space. But I do have characters that are not all white. That's the main thing. But I always leave that to authors that are not looking like me, because my looks doesn't necessarily have my class, besides the whiteness of privilege is the only thing I have out of all that. But yes, trying my best to say it in the best way possible. But again, I don't care if I offend other people in this case. But yeah. And then one of my favorite parts, at least of Balance of the Fates, is how did you come up with the rich history of like the vampires and the witches? Because it gets brought up so many times within the book.
Let's see. Did I write that? I can't remember. Okay, so for the history of the characters, that really was just like I said, when I edit, because when I do my first draft, it's just kind of like a basic like the plot, but I'll have like a character and I'll kind of like build on their character. So adding things about like Lucia's family, like about her grandmother and her relationship that she has with her mother and her sister and all of that. So I take like the bits of each character that like makes them who they are, their character, their culture, and through each version of the editing process, each draft, I'll like slowly build up like more and more and more. Sometimes I'll do like research like throughout history, throughout like all sorts of stuff, to find things that I feel like really connect with my character and who they are. And that will just like slowly, and it's funny because not just with the Balance Phase, with like all of the books that I write, when I'm writing the world building, I'll have so much information like about the culture and the world that either by the end of it ends up getting cut, or that is still a part of the world, but I don't actually put it down on the page, because there's just like so much of the world that just doesn't fit in the narrative. But I'll like try different things till I find what works for the character and for the story. So it was just a bit of like stitching and piecing until I'm like, okay, this like makes the entirety of the world, to try to make it feel as real as I can. But yeah, the process is different for each book depending on what I'm writing and like what characters I'm writing. I really let the characters try to like speak for themselves, like let them tell me their histories and their backstory.
I really like that. And I like their history too, of what I read and just how it gradually gets introduced into the book instead of all coming at you at once. Because that's hard when authors do that all at once. I don't digest easily that much information. So it's very nice that you write that way. Oh, why, wow, I can't spell. Triad to prove, oh, herself as a witch and her, Adeline, I believe. Or
So the triune.
yeah, the triad. There you go.
Um, so the triune was actually one of the hardest parts for me to write of this book, because I went back and forth so many times. Like I have so many different versions in my computer of this book just based on that portion. Just like makes up a lot of like the middle of the book. And because I was really unsure about how I wanted to do that, I knew that I wanted to have them at the school, because since all three of them, like their communities, they live in such different different areas. I was like, I need a way for them to be able to all come together, which is why I needed the school. I needed them to all be at the same place. And then with the triune, I was like really just testing out so many different things. And I was like, how am I going to do this? Because I was like, okay, there's this magic that all of them want to get. How do I decide who gets it? Because it's difficult because they all have such different abilities. The vampires, are fast and strong, and the werewolves are strong and they turn into werewolves, and then the witches have their magic. So I was like, their magic is also different. To make a competition that would be equal for all of them was like a really difficult thing to come up with. So I just went through so many different things, and finally I was like, you know what? I think a try like something where there's like multiple tests that test different skills would just be the like best and fairest way to test them. And I used influences from like, I love Hunger Games. I love, challenges. Love, what was it? In Divergent. One of the things I did like about Divergent was when they had Tris do like those tests, like those, it was like in her mind, did all those different tests or whatever to figure out where she sat. So I used influences from those different movies and stuff, as well as, I don't know if you know the TV show Survivor.
Yes, I know that TV show.
So I've been watching Survivor since I was like a little kid. I love like competition type shows. So I just used influences from all of those like different competition test type like shows and movies, books to kind of like help me create that.
I really like that. That's awesome. And especially because I do love the Hunger Games. That's personally one of my favorite authors, at least in her writing, since it is relevant today, oddly enough.
Yeah.
Is there history in your characters' names? That's just out of pure curiosity of me.
So specifically for the balance of fates, so I come up with many different ways to come up with names. Sometimes names can be like one of the hardest things for me to come up with, because finding a name is like picking a name for your child. You need a name that fits the character, like fits their appearance and their personality and their background, culture, all of that stuff. And then it just has to like look and sound good on the page as well. Specifically for the balance of fates, I think I came up with Lucia's name pretty easily. Like that was one of the first names I came up with. Like for like Hetan, his name I used some influences from like Native American names, because like he is Native American. Obviously, in the Balance of Fates, it is a fantasy type world, so we don't live in the world that we live in here. It's not America, but his character and his people were inspired by Native American people, so his name is Native American inspired. And then for Lucia, her name didn't have any influences. I was just like, I always really love like L names. So like that's how her name came about. And like if I see like a cool name somewhere, I'll like add that to my list, like in my notes app. I'll be like, oh, that's a good name. I could use that for a future character. So it's a mixture of like just looking through names that I have saved up and be like, does this fit any of my characters? As well as pulling certain cultural influences if the characters are influenced by certain cultures.
Ooh, very cool. And now the very important question: any upcoming books or Kickstarters currently?
So I have a list of upcoming books. 2026 is going to be a busy year. Yeah, so I have Princess and Potions, which I currently have the Kickstarter up. It's not live, but I do have the Kickstarter up for that, which is my sapphic cozy fantasy, which I'm super excited about. That was just so much fun. That was actually, I was inspired to write that one by Rebecca Thorne, because she was the first cozy fantasy that I ever read, and yeah, I just love Rebecca so much. She's so great. And so yeah, that's what inspired me to write cozy fantasy. And it's about a princess who falls into a portal to a fantasy world, and that one's just like a lot of fun. And then I have my queer paranormal dark academia book, which is We Were Wicked, and it's about this boy and his three friends. They go to a all boys preparatory boarding school, and they have to learn alchemy to help our main character Rowan cure himself of the werewolf curse. And then we have She Named the Sky, which is my first contemporary book that I'm writing, which I love this story so, so, so much. And it is about a Black girl who goes to an all white school, and she ends up vandalizing, this poor school in a Black neighborhood with her friend. And she's the only one who gets caught and in trouble for this. And she is made to tutor a kid from this school. And through that, going to the school tutoring there, she ends up meeting Xavier, who is a Black bull rider. And, they fall in love. And I love that story so much. It's so different than all of the other stories that I've written so far. But I just love it so much.
Well, they all sound good. I'm excited about reading. Well, I already have one bookmarked. That's the Princess and Potions. It's the one that I have bookmarked, waiting for it to go live. But I'm excited to read all those. And then, where can everyone find you on social media to
Um,
follow where you're at in the writing process and everything?
so all of my social medias, Threads, Instagram, and TikTok is all Raquel Raylin Writes.
Okay. And I'll have it all down below too, by the way, including Kickstarters will be down below if you want to check those out. If you made it to the very end, please like, subscribe, embrace your truth, tell your story. I have a story to tell, you have a story to tell. So let's tell our stories. Till next Saturday. Peace.